The cold fluorescent lights of the maternity hospital hallway reflected off the polished floor as if nothing emotional had ever happened there. Nurses moved quickly, doctors spoke in hushed professional tones, and somewhere behind one of the white doors, a newborn cried for the first time. For most families, this place marked the beginning of joy. For her, it had become the stage for humiliation, heartbreak, and a confrontation she would never forget. She sat on the edge of the narrow hospital bed, pale and exhausted, her hands trembling as she held her phone. Just hours earlier, she had given birth, her body still aching, her heart torn between relief and fear. She had expected her husband to be there, to hold her hand, to protect her. Instead, he was silent, unreachable, lost somewhere between obedience to his mother and cowardice toward his wife. The door opened sharply without a knock. Her mother-in-law entered the room with stiff steps, her face tight with disapproval. She did not glance at the baby. She did not ask how the delivery went. Her eyes went straight to her daughter-in-law, cold and assessing, as if she were an inconvenience that needed to be removed. "So," the older woman said, crossing her arms, "when are you leaving?" The question hit harder than any physical pain. The young woman blinked, unsure she had heard correctly. "Leaving," she repeated quietly. "Yes. This hospital stay costs money," her mother-in-law snapped. "And since my son is not here, there's no reason for you to stay. Take the child and go back to your parents' house. You're not welcome in our family anymore." The words fell like stones. Nurses passed by in the hallway, unaware that a woman who had just given birth was being emotionally torn apart. Tears welled in her eyes, but she forced herself not to cry. Crying had never softened this woman's heart. "This is your grandson," she whispered, glancing at the small bundle sleeping beside her. The mother-in-law scoffed. "Grandson or not, I decide what happens in this family. And you," she pointed sharply, "you were a mistake." Silence filled the room. The young woman felt abandoned in the truest sense of the word. Not just by her husband, but by the future she had believed in. She had given everything to this family, endured insults, swallowed her pride, and now, at her weakest moment, she was being cast aside like unwanted luggage at the wrong station. The door opened again. This time, the sound was different. Slower. Confident. Both women turned. A man in a tailored coat stepped into the room, his presence immediately shifting the air. He was calm, composed, and unmistakably authoritative. The mother-in-law froze mid-sentence, her face draining of color. "Good afternoon," he said evenly. What are you doing here?" she stammered. The man glanced at the young woman on the bed, then at the baby, and finally back at the older woman. "I came because I was informed that a patient here is being harassed and emotionally abused." The mother-in-law laughed nervously. "This is a family matter." "No," he replied firmly. "This is a legal matter." He introduced himself as a hospital legal representative, accompanied by a social services officer who had quietly entered behind him. A nurse followed, eyes sharp with concern. Suddenly, the room that had felt suffocating moments earlier felt like it had oxygen again. "You cannot force a patient to leave," the man continued. "Especially not a woman who has just given birth. Any attempt to intimidate her is grounds for immediate action." The mother-in-law opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her authority, so absolute just minutes ago, crumbled in front of official power. The young woman felt something unfamiliar rising in her chest. Relief. As the official spoke, her phone buzzed. A message from her husband finally appeared. Too late. She didn't open it. Far away, on a brightly lit television set, another confrontation was unfolding, one that would soon flood social media feeds. Kylie Minogue sat across from Kelly Clarkson, the atmosphere noticeably tense. What began as light promotion turned into probing questions that edged too close to personal boundaries. Kylie's smile tightened. She answered politely at first, but the persistence wore her down. "I'm here to talk about my music," she said calmly, yet firmly. Kelly pressed again, framing the question as harmless curiosity, but the edge was undeniable. The audience sensed it. Cameras captured every shift in expression, every breath. Kylie paused, looked directly at Kelly, and said, "I don't think this is respectful." The room fell quiet. When Kelly attempted to move past it with a joke, Kylie stood. "I'm done," she said, her voice steady. "I won't sit here and be uncomfortable for entertainment." She walked off the set, heels clicking with resolve. The audience gasped. Producers scrambled. Within minutes, clips spread online with captions screaming about a heated clash, but those watching closely saw something else, a woman choosing dignity over compliance. Back in the hospital room, the mother-in-law was escorted out, speechless, her earlier cruelty echoing uselessly in the corridor. The door closed behind her with a finality that felt like justice. The young woman leaned back against her pillow, tears finally falling, not from pain, but from release. She wasn't alone anymore. Not today. As the baby stirred, she held him closer, whispering promises she intended to keep. Somewhere between a television studio and a hospital room, two women made the same quiet decision. They would no longer accept being silenced, humiliated, or pushed aside. Sometimes, the most powerful moments come when someone stands up and walks away. The maternity hospital was supposed to be a place of beginnings, but for her it felt like an ending. The sterile smell of disinfectant mixed with the lingering ache in her body, reminding her with every breath that she had just gone through one of the most painful and transformative moments of her life. She lay still, staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft rhythmic beeping of medical equipment and the distant sounds of footsteps echoing down the corridor. Beside her, the tiny bundle wrapped in a white blanket slept peacefully, unaware of the storm gathering around him. She had imagined this moment differently. She had pictured her husband smiling through tears, holding their child with trembling hands, whispering promises of protection and love. Instead, there was only silence. His phone had been switched off since morning. No messages, no calls. And then, just when she thought the loneliness could not deepen any further, the door opened. Her mother-in-law entered without hesitation, her sharp heels clicking against the floor like a warning. She did not smile. She did not ask about the birth. Her eyes moved around the room with obvious irritation, as if even the hospital air offended her. "So, it's done," she said flatly. "You've given birth." The young woman nodded weakly. "Yes." The older woman crossed her arms. "Good. Then there's no reason for you to stay here any longer." The words hung in the air, heavy and unreal. I just gave birth," she replied softly. "The doctors said." "I don't care what the doctors said," the mother-in-law snapped. "This is expensive, and my son is not even here. Take the child and leave. Go wherever you came from." Her heart sank. She looked instinctively toward the door, hoping her husband might suddenly appear, that this would all be some cruel misunderstanding. But the hallway remained empty. "This is your grandson," she said quietly, her voice shaking. "How can you say this?" The older woman's lips curled with disdain. "Blood doesn't change mistakes. You were never suitable for our family. I warned my son, but he didn't listen. Now it's time to fix that." Tears burned behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had cried too much in this family already. She felt stripped of dignity, reduced to nothing more than an inconvenience, discarded at the very moment she was most vulnerable. Just then, the door opened again. A man stepped inside, followed by a nurse and a woman carrying a clipboard. The shift in energy was immediate. The mother-in-law turned sharply, clearly annoyed. "What is this?" she demanded. The man spoke calmly, his tone firm. "We received a report of a disturbance involving a patient who has just given birth." The mother-in-law laughed dismissively. "This is a private family matter." "No," he replied, meeting her gaze without hesitation. "This is a hospital matter. And potentially a legal one." The nurse moved closer to the bed, offering the young woman a reassuring look. For the first time since the confrontation began, she felt seen. "You cannot force a patient to leave," the man continued. "Any form of intimidation or emotional pressure is unacceptable. If it continues, we will involve social services and law enforcement." The mother-in-law's confidence faltered. Her mouth opened, then closed. The authority she had relied on for years vanished in seconds. Without another word, she was escorted out, her silence louder than any insult she had thrown earlier. As the door closed, the young woman exhaled deeply, as though she had been holding her breath for days. She looked down at her child, her hands trembling, and whispered, "It's okay now." Elsewhere, under the bright lights of a television studio, tension of a different kind was unfolding. Kylie Minogue sat across from Kelly Clarkson, smiling politely as the interview began. At first, everything felt light, familiar, safe. But gradually, the questions shifted. They became more personal, more probing, brushing against topics Kylie had carefully chosen to keep private. She answered with grace, redirecting where she could. But the persistence grew uncomfortable. The audience sensed it. The energy changed. Cameras zoomed in on Kylie's face as her smile faded. "I don't feel comfortable discussing this," she said gently but clearly. Kelly tried to move forward, but the moment had already fractured. Kylie paused, stood up slowly, and addressed the room. "I respect this platform," she said, "but I respect myself more." With that, she walked off the set. Gasps rippled through the audience. Producers exchanged frantic looks. Within minutes, social media erupted, labeling it a heated clash, but beneath the headlines was a simple truth: someone had drawn a line and refused to let it be crossed. Back in the hospital, the young woman's phone buzzed at last. A message from her husband appeared on the screen. She stared at it for a long moment, then locked the phone without reading it. Some words came too late to matter. The nurse adjusted the blanket around the baby and smiled. "You're safe here," she said softly. For the first time that day, the young woman allowed herself to cry, not from pain, but from release. She had been abandoned, humiliated, and pushed toward the edge, yet she was still standing. In different places, under different lights, two women made the same quiet decision. They would no longer accept disrespect disguised as authority. They would no longer stay silent to keep others comfortable. Sometimes strength doesn't roar. Sometimes it stands up, turns around, and walks away.